Time then to head around Europe, look at some of the big stories in the world of European football this weekend with Trans-Europe Express's very own Andy Brassell. Good afternoon, Andy.
Afternoon, fellas. How are you?
Good, thank you. I want to pick your brains on this one. Few reports that if Tottenham do make a change in the dugout, Adi Hütter, most recently at Monaco, could be the man to step in. Now, Andy, he's a touch sceptical, feeling like someone else with no experience of the Premier League suddenly been parachuted in at this pretty difficult moment. Might be a stretch. So what do you make of that, were it to happen?
Well, he's a good coach in the right environment, and he's had some good moments at Eintracht Frankfurt and Monaco. But, who really would change things at this point? I can't see what particular element of him would recommend him to this situation at Spurs and why he would want to damage his reputation to doing this. I mean, I'm always very sceptical of this. Either on one hand, he knows the club, or he has no experience in the Premier League. It's just about, I guess, the situation and the temperament to deal with that situation. But even though Tudor was left field, there was a lot to recommend him. I think he's gone in there and just realised, oh my God, this is way bigger than anything I expected. I don't know. Who do you think would make a difference? Because I think at this stage it's really, really hard to say. And just plucking a currently unemployed manager out of thin air is not going to cut it for me.
I don't know. I just in terms of profile and personality, somebody's got to go in there and make them less brittle and fragile and give them a bit of confidence. And I don't know who that is. I mean, I'm at completely a loss now. It's difficult, but maybe someone with an understanding of the Premier League and the teams that they've still got to play and some of the players. But we'll see. We'll see, Andy. So, look, at the moment, Igor Tudor is still very much the manager. So, I heard you talking to Danny last night about Antoine Griezmann. I agreed with you that he looked really good in those games against Tottenham. I mean, look, he's not getting any younger, but you kind of feel could he have had another season at the top level? Because it looks like he's off to the MLS.
Yeah, but he's off to the MLS in summer. So we've known for a while that Orlando are interested in him, that they want to do everything to bring him over, including a pretty decent salary as designated player. But they were trying to get him to go across before the MLS transfer deadline, which is this month. And he made clear, going back a couple of weeks, especially after Atletico got to the Copa del Rey final, that he wants to win something before he leaves Atletico again for the second time, which will be for good this time, obviously. Now, look, we've known MLS is a personal project for him. This is something that he wants to do with his family. It's felt that because of the strong Hispanic community in Orlando, that will be something that will work for his family as well. His wife is Spanish, of course, and he's lived there since he was 14. But I think he's kind of done the right thing because, I think aptitude-wise, he could definitely play for another year in La Liga. But as it stands, they're going into the back end of the Champions League, although how much further they're going to get, we'll wait and see. They've got the Copa del Rey final against Real Sociedad, his former club, which feels kind of poetic and a good finish. And he's not a first pick anymore. That's the important thing. So he's been able to be Simeone on the pitch for the best part of a decade now, on and off. And it must be pretty wearing. I mean, Claude Makélélé interviewed him on telly last week after the Tottenham game, working for French TV. And he said, as someone who's getting on a bit, how do you still do that much running? It must be exhausting. And do you know what? I think there's something in that, and the mental side of it as well. And going into the start of this season, knowing that having been the guy for so long, he no longer is. And I think it became pretty clear that, it's just how much he loves Atleti that he stayed this little bit longer, because as soon as his status was kind of threatened in terms of France and he was overlooked for the captaincy instead of Mbappe, he never really got over that. So I think it shows how much he cares about Atleti that he stayed this little bit longer.
Good game, wasn't it, though?
They did lose, of course, to Real Madrid with Jude Bellingham. I saw him tweeting earlier on, saying it's great to be back with my brothers.
Yeah, and look, they were really good. I think the interesting thing, while Mbappe has been out injured, nursing this knee knock the last couple of weeks, he came on a sub, just as he came on a sub against Manchester City. A lot of things are easier without him and Jude Bellingham. Look, I'm not saying they're a better team without him and Jude Bellingham, but it it really removes a lot of the questions about mesh and chemistry and all that sort of stuff, because all of a sudden it's Vinicius's team again. Just give him the ball and he'll make the magic happen. And I guess it's a really good underlining of wherever Vinicius goes, whether he stays at Real Madrid or whether, as I would imagine is more likely long term, he moves somewhere else. He needs somewhere where he's the guy. Some players need that, and I think he needs that because he's been brilliant for them in the last week.
Where should we move on to? Let's move on to Germany. And you say Tuchel is helping Kane's bid to beat Lewandowski's record, you say?
Yeah, he is. He's allowing him to meet up with the England squad a few days later to give him a little bit of rest. Now, Kane came back to the starting lineup in the Bundesliga for the first time in nearly a month at the weekend against Union Berlin. And he looked a little bit rusty, actually, because we know he's someone who likes to play his way through dips in form and more likely through injury in this time. And Bayern have been really careful with him. You know, Vincent Kompany said a while back, I don't really care about individual records. I care that he's ready to fire for us at the key points of the season, and that's fair enough. Of course, he'd come on for half an hour at the game of in Bayer Leverkusen last week, and he had a goal disallowed. But he missed a couple of very, very clear chances that, you know, lesser strikers than Kane, you would imagine, would put away. And in his words, I scored the most difficult of the three proper chances that I got. Now, this leaves him 10 goals from equaling the record of Robert Lewandowski, the 41 in a Bundesliga season. Now, he was asked about it again afterwards, and he said, well, really, I just need to score a hat-trick in one of these games, which is a great way of looking at it. And I think that's absolutely true. But the question is, will he play those 7 games? I don't know if he's trying to tell Kompany by missing those chances, look, the more regularly you play me, the more minutes you give me, the more on it I'm going to be. So it's interesting to see how that's panning out. But as well, another teenage debutant for Bayern at the weekend. They've had 7 teenagers debut for them this season, which is pretty amazing, and I think shows you what Kompany is trying to do. Like Kane said to us at the start of the season, this is the smallest first team squad that I've ever been a part of, really. And it's obviously because Kompany trusts so much in the youngsters.
It's good. I just want to mention Raheem Sterling.
Yeah.
Piece in the paper this morning. He's been sub 3 games running now. It's still not quite happening for him, is it?
But having said that, Andy, is there any surprise in that for you? Because
he hasn't played a lot, that's true.
Exactly. I mean, playing him for the whole 90 minutes at the moment, it just can't happen. I think what's quite interesting is he played this game against Ajax, huge game, because Feyenoord are trying to close out second place. They're 5 points in front of Ajax at the moment. And it wasn't really Sterling's sort of game. It was one of those games where Ajax didn't really dare to win it. They didn't have the ingenuity to win it, and Feyenoord just lined up to try and not get beaten. Robin van Persie's been under a lot of pressure as coach, and he now is advised by Dick Advocaat, who came in this week in a sort of Terry Venables with Brian Robson sort of situation, if you like, going back to Middlesbrough. And the problem is he needs to give Sterling game time to get back to a decent level, but they're playing games that they need to win. And so they took him off just before the hour when, you know, he was trying to do stuff, but it wasn't really happening. And really, he just needs a run of games. But Van Persie is under such pressure. He came out and said after the game, look, I need more from Raheem. But it's like, well, he's trying everything. Like, but if he hasn't played for the best part of 2 years, or if he hasn't played regularly for the best part of 2 years, how can he really be at the physical level at this point in the season?
Let's have a word on Cesc Fabregas, who's the Como coach. He's been linked to big jobs in Italy and the Premier League and beyond. They've had 5 consecutive wins in Serie A. They're 4th in the table. They're above Juve. So he's working his magic.
Yeah, above Juventus and Roma as stands, which is pretty amazing. Look, he's been quite coy about them making the Champions League, but they've been building something incredible there over the last couple of years. And there was always an opportunity for Como when they came up. Of course, they're really well backed. A lot of Indonesian money going into the club. So they've gone out there and they've done it the right way. I guess in a sort of RB Leipzig sort of way, bought a lot of young players who they can develop. Alassane Diao is one of those. He scored and assisted in the 5-0 over Pisa at the weekend. And they play really exciting, attractive football, but there's a bit of streetwiseness to him. It's sort of quite Arteta-esque, I suppose, in that sort of way. The thing is, in terms of the interest in him, I think there are a lot of people on the outside who assume that he'll get to the end of this season, and whether he gets them in the Champions League or the Europa League, and I'm sure they'll get in one of them, that he'll just get a big job and be off somewhere. But that overlooks the fact that he owns a shareholding in the club, so he's financially invested in it as well as emotionally invested in it, and he's come up the whole way with them. And also, it's the fact that he was offered every job under the sun last summer as well. So Leverkusen made him an offer, Leipzig made him an offer, Inter made him an offer. He said no to all of them. And do you know what? Certainly in terms of Italian football, Como are well better resource than a lot of the big traditional clubs are. So I think it's going to take a massive, massive offer to get him to move.
And not a bad place to live. I walked past the ground a couple of years ago. It's right on the lake. It's only a tiny ground, but it's a lovely spot, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're developing it at the moment as well. They're trying to make themselves more international. This is the start of something. This isn't a one-off thing.
In France, I mean, Lens are really breathing down PSG's neck. And I know PSG got a game in hand. I mean, could you see a world in which they pip them to the title, Andy?
I don't think it's totally impossible because, as I said before, we were talking about the Chelsea PSG Champions League game. PSG is so unpredictable.
It was really a game,
well, when they were at their best in that game, but even in the first game, Andy, where they won 5-2 at the Parc des Princes, Chelsea were well in it for over an hour. And then, they just got that little bit of extra edge to step it up. And, they took the chances very well across those two games, I thought. But the fact is, we don't know when the next physical dip is. Bear in mind, in that second game at the Bridge, Bradley Barcola, who's been in great form recently, rolled his ankle and he's going to be out for several weeks. There's been such a physical load on them. I don't think we can predict how they're going to be in a month. Whereas Lens are nice. Slow and steady is going to win the race for them if they are going to win the race. They're brilliantly coached, like arguably the best coach in the league, certainly after Luis Enrique in Pierre Sage. They've rehabilitated players like Florian Thauvin, who's 33 years old now, but got his first France call-up in 6 years. They've been out there and they've scouted really well as well. They're really, really interesting team. And they beat Angers 5-1 on Friday night. Look, I think the interesting thing is, Andy, you were talking last week about how unfair it was that PSG had their game shifted to give themselves a little bit of extra rest before Chelsea. Well, this is the next French political hot potato. The fact that Lens against PSG is in between their two legs of the Champions League quarter-final. And, of course, they needed Nantes to move the previous game. And Lens have just said, no. Basically, we're not going to move it for you.
Why should they?
So
absolutely.
The league, I agree with you. Now, the league can step in, but they can only do that once in a season. Right. So, basically, after that, if they get to the semi-final, they won't be able to postpone then. So they have to choose when to use their joker, PSG. It's a tricky one.